I always felt safe at home, until that day changed everything. I live alone in a small apartment in the city. Nothing ever happened here, and every night I went to bed thinking I was completely alone. But that night, I started noticing small things moving on their own, faint whispers I couldn't explain, and shadows that didn't belong to me. If you think you're safe alone, subscribe and make sure you're not missing what's coming next. That night, as I walked to the kitchen for a glass of water, I heard it, a soft creak from the living room. I froze. I live alone. There shouldn't have been anyone there. My heart started pounding, each beat echoing like a drum in my chest. I tried to tell myself it was just the building settling, or maybe the wind rattling a window, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. Something was there, watching, waiting. I crept toward the hallway, every step deliberate, my hands trembling, my senses hyper-aware. Shadows clung to the corners, darker than they should have been, stretching across the walls like spilled ink. The creak came again, slower this time, almost deliberate, almost taunting. I swallowed hard and tried to breathe, but the presence behind me felt closer than ever, like a cold weight pressing against my back. I reached the living room. The apartment looked normal, too quiet. And yet, the air was thick, heavy, almost tangible. Then I saw it, a shadow, darker than the rest, near the sofa. I blinked, and it vanished. My mind screamed at me that it was just my imagination. Yet, the fear that gripped me said otherwise. I turned toward the faucet in the kitchen, and my stomach dropped. The water was dripping, though I had turned it off moments before. Impossible. I live alone. I know I turned it off. Panic surged through me. I ran to my bedroom and locked the door. I crouched behind it, heart hammering, ears straining for every sound. The apartment was alive with quiet noises I couldn't place. A faint scraping along the floorboards, a whisper I couldn't understand, the soft rustle of something brushing against the walls. My hand shook uncontrollably, and my breaths came in short, shallow gasps. Minutes or hours, I couldn't tell, passed in silence. I dared to peek out. Nothing. The living room appeared empty, but my front door, the lock was undone. I had locked it myself. Someone had been here. My sanctuary had been violated. My mind screamed, trying to rationalize it, but I knew the truth. I checked every corner, every closet, every room. Nothing, yet the sensation remained. The shadows seemed to grow heavier, almost sentient, shifting slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. I tried to sleep that night. Lights on, doors locked, but the feeling persisted. Even lying in bed, I felt eyes on me, scrutinizing, judging, waiting. Every creak, every whisper, every movement of the wind made my pulse spike. Days passed. I tried to convince myself it was over, that it had been a scare, a trick, a hallucination, but I couldn't shake it. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow felt alive. I started sleeping with the lights on. Even then, I heard footsteps pacing in the living room. Whispers I couldn't understand. The faintest creaking in the hallway outside my bedroom door. My mind kept asking the same question over and over. How long had it been watching me? How long had it been inside my apartment? Invisible, patient, waiting. One night, I awoke to the feeling of being stared at. I could see the faint outline of something standing in the living room, perfectly still. My heart froze. I dared not move, but my eyes refused to leave it. My phone was on the nightstand, a tempting lifeline, but I didn't dare reach for it. Whoever, or whatever, it knew I was awake. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just waited. The next morning, small things were out of place. A cup on the counter had shifted. A book was on the floor that I had left on the shelf. Nothing else. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. Nothing. But the feeling never left. I installed cameras, locks, alarms, anything to make the apartment mine again. But even the cameras didn't capture it. Sometimes, reviewing the footage, I saw fleeting shadows, corners of the lens catching something moving, too fast, too quietly. I would watch, heart hammering, hoping it was just a trick of the light, but I knew better. Weeks went by. I avoided certain rooms, moved furniture to block shadows, tried to reclaim my space. But at night, the presence remained. I could hear soft breathing when no one was there. I would wake to cold drafts, the faint scrape of something moving across the floor, whispers in a language I couldn't understand. My sleep became broken, restless. I started writing down everything, sounds, movements, feelings, trying to find a pattern, trying to rationalize it, but there was none. Only fear. Then came the night I could no longer ignore it. I awoke to a dragging sound across the living room floor. My eyes shot open. There it was again, a dark silhouette, impossibly tall and still, standing at the corner, staring at me. My phone buzzed. Another text from an unknown number. Don't sleep yet. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just observing. It was communicating. It knew I was awake. I didn't sleep for days. I barricaded doors, installed motion sensors, checked locks obsessively. Nothing could stop it. Every night, I would hear movement, the softest footsteps, the faintest whisper, shadows flickering across walls that should have remained still. I began noticing subtle signs of its presence. Small objects slightly shifted. The faint scent of something wet and metallic lingering in the air. Even the feeling of a weight pressing down where no one stood. I realized I was losing track of time. Days blurred into nights. I started sleeping in the living room, lights blazing, doors locked, cameras rolling. Still, the presence persisted. I would wake to see it at the edge of my vision, a shadow darker than the rest, perfectly still, observing. It didn't flinch when I shone a flashlight toward it, didn't react when I called out. It simply waited. Even leaving the apartment offered no relief. I started feeling watched outside too, a faint, lingering pressure, as if the same eyes followed me everywhere. Friends suggested stress, paranoia, exhaustion. But deep down, I knew the truth. Whoever, or whatever it was had marked me, and it wasn't done. I tried to move. I thought relocating would help. But even in a new place, the feeling followed. Shadows lingered where they shouldn't. Footsteps echoed when no one was there. Whispers came from corners, impossible to understand, but unmistakably real. I began to understand that it didn't need to be seen to be felt. It was patient, calculating, waiting for me to let my guard down, to feel safe again, because that's when it strikes. Now, months later, I still live in fear. I never sleep more than an hour or two at a time. Lights stay on, cameras record constantly. But even knowing this, I still feel it. Watching, waiting, breathing, always just beyond the edge of perception. Sometimes, I catch it in my peripheral vision, a shadow darker than the rest, standing motionless in the corner of the room, its presence undeniable. I live alone. Or at least, I thought I did. Even as I write this, I feel it behind me, not moving, not speaking, but aware, watching, waiting. I don't know if it ever sleeps. I don't know if it ever leaves. And I've learned something I wish I didn't. There is no safety. Not in doors, not in locks, not in walls. It doesn't need permission. It just waits. And when you feel most secure, that's when it strikes. I am still here, still writing, still alive, but always, always under its gaze. I have learned to live in the shadows it casts, to breathe carefully, to speak softly, to move cautiously. And yet, the knowledge that it is watching, always watching, never leaves me. Every light flicker, every creak of the floor, every whisper of air across the walls reminds me that I am never truly alone. I only thought I was safe until that night, until it started watching me. And now I know the truth. No one is ever truly alone. I never thought it could happen to me. I've always been careful, meticulous even, locking every door, checking every window. I thought my apartment was my sanctuary, that I was safe. But I was wrong. Everything changed that night. It started as a normal evening. I came home late from work, tired, unpacked my bag, and started my routine. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the furniture. Everything was quiet, too quiet, I would realize later. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. But then I felt it. The first subtle shift. My chest tightened, a cold wave of unease washing over me. Something wasn't right. I looked around, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But the hairs on my neck stood on end. I went to the kitchen for water. That's when I saw it. A glass I had left on the counter that morning was now slightly closer to the edge, as if someone had picked it up and set it down again. I froze. My apartment is small. I know every inch. I hadn't moved the glass. At first, I laughed nervously. I'm just tired, I told myself. You're imagining things. But the feeling persisted. I kept hearing faint sounds, soft creaks, like footsteps across the hardwood floors. But when I turned, nothing was there. By midnight, I was pacing, every shadow stretching and twisting under the dim lamplight. The apartment felt alive in a way it had never felt before, watching me, waiting. And then I saw it. A shadow crossing the hallway outside my bedroom door. I blinked, and it was gone. I tried to sleep, but the bed felt like a trap. Every little noise made my heart race. The soft hum of the refrigerator sounded like whispers. My mind started to play tricks. or so I told myself. Yet I couldn't shake the certainty. I was not alone. The next day, I double-checked every lock, inspected the windows, even installed extra security measures. But nothing would change the sensation gnawing at me. The apartment felt smaller somehow. The walls closing in, corners darker than before. That evening, the feeling returned. Louder, stronger. The creaks were no longer subtle. They were deliberate. The objects that had been slightly out of place before were now clearly moved. The chair near my desk was tilted, a book on the floor that I hadn't touched. I wasn't imagining it anymore. I confronted the hallway again. The shadows seemed to stretch toward me, elongating in impossible ways. And then I saw it, unmistakably. A silhouette, dark and human-like, standing at the far end of the corridor. It didn't move at first, just watched. My blood ran cold. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet were glued to the spot. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow of my own making, but it didn't fade, didn't blend into the walls. It was there, waiting, watching. And when I moved, it moved too, always staying just out of reach, just on the edge of perception. I started sleeping with the lights on, but it didn't help. The presence followed me, silent, subtle. Doors I had closed were now ajar. Lamps that had been off flickered on. I never saw it in the living room, never in the kitchen, but I felt it. Always watching, always near. I tried talking to friends, telling them I was stressed, exhausted. They laughed, said I was overthinking, imagining things. Maybe I was. But when I came home that night, the feeling was too strong to ignore. I locked the door behind me and sat on the couch, every sense alert. That's when I noticed the reflection in the window. Just a flicker, barely there, but unmistakable. A figure, blurred, human, watching me from behind. I spun around, heart hammering, empty, nothing. But the reflection didn't lie. Someone, or something, had been there. I called the police once, when I found the front door unlocked in the morning. They checked the building, found nothing, and left. They didn't understand. How could they? I couldn't explain that it wasn't about forced entry or theft. It was something else, something that knew me. Days passed, and the feeling intensified. I noticed small things, things I hadn't before. A faint handprint on the refrigerator, barely visible. Footsteps in the hallway when I was sure I was alone. The sound of breathing, too soft to be human. One night, I decided to confront it. I took a flashlight, heart in my throat, and walked down the hallway. The shadows shifted as I moved. The moment I shone the light at the end, the silhouette appeared, then disappeared. I could hear it though. Soft, deliberate footsteps receding, always just out of reach. I stopped leaving my apartment. I stopped trusting windows and doors. I installed cameras, tried to record it, but the footage showed nothing. Just static, flickering images. The cameras couldn't capture it. It existed only in the corners of my vision, in the shadows, in the feeling of being watched. I don't know how long it went on. Days, weeks. Time blurred together. Every creak, every shadow, every flicker of light made me flinch. I realized I was no longer living in the apartment. I was living with it. And now, here I am, writing this, because someone needs to know. Because if it can do this to me, it could do it to anyone. I shouldn't have stayed home. I shouldn't have ignored the first signs, and yet there's no escaping it. Because even now, as I sit in the safety of my room typing this, I feel it, watching, waiting, silent, patient. I don't need to see it to know it's there. And I fear if I ever leave, it will follow. Always, no matter where I go, no matter what I do, I will never be alone again. I thought moving into this apartment would be a fresh start. New city, new job, new life. I was alone for the first time in years, and I told myself I'd enjoy the solitude. I didn't. Not for long. The first night was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels alive. I unpacked my things slowly, arranging my few possessions just so. The apartment was modest. Living room, kitchen, bedroom, a narrow hallway connecting them. Nothing special, but that night, I felt it. The first prickling sense that someone or something was watching me. At first, I ignored it. I told myself I was tired, stressed, imagining things. But the unease wouldn't go away. It started small. The soft creak of floorboards when I was alone in the living room. A shadow that lingered too long in the corner of my eye. I would turn suddenly, expecting to find someone there. But nothing. By the second night, things had shifted. I had gone to bed early, trying to fall asleep with the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background. But the shadows in my room seemed thicker, heavier. And then I heard it, a whisper of movement in the hallway. Just a small sound, a shuffle, but enough to make my heart pound in my chest. I sat up slowly, ears straining. The hallway was dark, the faint glow from the living room spilling in. I could see the edges of the doors, the walls stretching into darkness. And then I saw it, a shadow, long and humanoid, just at the edge of my vision, at the far end of the hall. I froze, my body locked. I didn't dare breathe. It didn't move, not at first. It just waited, watching. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. I was glued to the bed, every nerve screaming, every instinct screaming at me to escape. And then it vanished, like it had never been there. But I knew it had been. The next morning I checked everything. Doors locked, windows secure, no sign of anyone. But the sense of being watched lingered, like a stain on the air itself. I tried to dismiss it, told myself I was losing it, but I couldn't shake it. Every room felt smaller, every shadow sharper. A week passed, and the incidents grew bolder. Objects moved slightly, my keys on the counter, a book on the floor that I hadn't touched. I would come home from work to find chairs tilted, cups in odd places. It wasn't violent, not yet, just subtle, precise, calculated, and always the feeling that I was being observed. I installed a small camera in the living room, hoping for proof, but the footage was useless, static, flickering, nothing concrete. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, imagination, paranoia, but deep down, I knew I wasn't alone. Then came the night when I finally saw it properly. I had been pacing the living room, nerves frayed, tea in hand, The soft lamplight barely touched the corners of the room. I glanced at the hallway and froze. There, clearly visible, was a shadow, human-shaped but distorted. It leaned slightly, impossibly long, its form swallowed at the edges by darkness. It wasn't a trick of the light, it was real. I tried to move, to scream, but my body refused. Feet stuck to the floor, hands trembling. The shadow didn't advance, didn't retreat, it just observed. And in that moment, I understood something terrifying. It knew me. Knew my fears, my routines, how I would react. I spent the rest of the night awake, lights on, eyes darting to every corner. Every creak, every whisper of wind made me jump. I couldn't sleep. The apartment had become a cage, and I was the prisoner of a presence that didn't need to enter, didn't need to touch me. It just watched. Days merged into nights. I started noticing more signs. Subtle, almost invisible. Footprints in the dust by the windowsill. Slightly open doors I was sure I had closed. The refrigerator hum occasionally interrupted by the sound of something sliding across the counter. Always gone when I checked. I told no one. Who would believe this? Friends laughed, told me I was imagining it, but I wasn't. The fear was real, visceral, creeping into my bones. I started to avoid the hallway, the living room, the places where it might be. But avoidance didn't work. Presence isn't constrained by walls. One night, I heard a sound behind me while cooking. A soft, deliberate shuffle, like a foot brushing against the floor. I spun around, heart racing, but the kitchen was empty. My glass of water, placed carefully on the counter, had shifted slightly, and I saw it, just in the corner of my eye, a shadow stretching across the living room floor, far longer than any human should be. I ran to the hallway, but it seemed endless, darker than I remembered, the shadows thicker. I wanted to call for help, but my voice caught in my throat. I reached the bedroom door and froze. A figure, or something like it, was at the far end, just standing, just watching. And I realized fully that it had been there all along, observing, waiting. From that night on, I never felt safe again. I stayed in my room, lights on, checking corners constantly. I avoided mirrors and windows where reflections might betray it, but the feeling never left. Even now, writing this, I feel its gaze, a weight pressing through the walls, following me. I tried moving out once, packed my things, left the apartment empty for a night. When I returned, the feeling was stronger, somehow closer, as if it had moved with me, settled into the rooms, claiming them. I could not escape. It wasn't violent, not in a way that could be measured or recorded. It didn't need to touch. It just existed. A shadow in every corner, a whisper in every creak. Watching, patient, knowing. I have learned to live with it, in a way, though fear never fades. Every sound, every shadow, every subtle movement of objects reminds me it is there. It always has been. It always will be. And so I write this, hoping that by telling someone, anyone, I can make sense of it. But I doubt I can. There is no reasoning with presence like this. There is only awareness, constant and unbearable. If you ever find yourself alone in a quiet apartment and you feel it, the sensation that you are not alone, do not ignore it. Do not try to rationalize it. It watches, waits, and knows more than you can ever imagine. I should have left the first time I felt it. I should have trusted that first prickle of fear. But I didn't. And now, I can never be alone. Every corner hides it. Every shadow carries its gaze. And no matter where I go, I will feel it. Always watching, always patient.